Great. Hi, everybody. I appreciate you all tuning in at the end of a long day. I'm very happy to go ahead with this topic. It's one of my favorites. But maybe should we start with the poll questions, Maciej?
I do have the poll questions, and I'm going to launch them.
Maciej?
Yes.
Am I online?
Yep,
Okay.
I can hear you. Yes, I'm going to launch the poll questions right now. So the very first question is, what is your current employment situation? Is it unemployed and fully focused on the job search, or should be? Working as well as job hunting? Or maybe you're working and planning to job hunt as well. So please let us know. And we will just give a few more seconds. Okay, perfect. Okay, we're gonna close the poll right now. Right, and we actually have 63% answer the first question. So unemployed and fully focused on job searching. 31% said they're working as well as job hunting, and 6% said working and planning to job hunt. So let's move on to the second poll, which is launching right now. And the question is, how are your interview skills? Are they relatively weak, average, good, or maybe even good, but you could still use a few tips? So we'll answer that right now. And I think, okay, so we'll give a few more seconds. And we'll make sure that, yep. Okay, so we're closing the poll right now. All right. Actually, 47% said good, but I still could use a few tips. 42% said average, and only 11% said relatively weak. So we have a good, strong crowd today.
Okay, can you give me those one more time?
Sure, of course. The very first poll was the first question.
No,
first
the
answer.
Second one. The second question, one more time. So it was 47 was good, and yep. What was average?
42%.
Okay, great.
And then 11 was relatively weak. Mm-hmm.
All right. So it's the right crowd for advanced interview skills.
Correct.
Okay, thanks, everybody. So I think we're going to be well targeted for this group. So to begin with, whenever I talk about interviewing, I like to clarify that interview strategy is a little bit different depending on who you're interviewing with. So ideally, when you're, I focus a lot on the hidden job market, and IExec focuses a lot more on the over-posted job market. So we're going to talk about both of those, but it's a little bit of a different technique when you're talking with an internal HR person or an external recruiter, which is often the first step with a job posting, not always, versus a hiring manager or someone on the team that you'll be working for. And so I'm going to begin by talking about the hiring manager, because there's a lot more you can do in terms of altering your technique and kind of doing an even better job than the other person, as opposed to working with headhunters and internal HR people, but we're going to cover both. And so I'll try and clarify which is which. And I'm going to start with talking about when your interviews with line management. And the big reason for the difference is they know a lot about the job and what's needed. And so it's less of a general personality, typical interviewing thing, and a lot more, there's an opportunity to talk a lot more about the work. And when you're talking with external and internal recruiters, they know about the company and the job. Maybe they know quite a bit, but they never know as much. So it's a little bit more focused on typical interviewing questions. And if you do well with the HR group, obviously you'll go ahead to the line group even with the other one. So you'll definitely have both. So I'm going to talk about the line management, and then about the recruiters. And this is my normal presentation. It's a little longer. I don't think we're going to get to the practice questions, but that would be for another day. So first of all, some of your success starts with the very beginning. And so I like to talk about this because if you're a little panicked or thrilled or caught off guard when the interview is set up, you might not think to ask a few more questions that could make all the difference in your performing well. So if they phone, try and be very chatty and talk to the person as long as you can. Ask them things like the questions you see here. Sometimes you can get depending on who's calling, you can get them to tell you quite a little bit about it. And you might not think to hang on the phone that long, but often you can get a lot of information. They might give you some more detail about the person. Sometimes they'll even tell you where you are in the search. They can tell you a little bit about the focus. And again, which of these questions are appropriate depends a lot on who you're talking to. So if it's an administrative assistant, they'll know one kind of thing. If it's a junior HR person, they'll know another kind of thing. Sometimes it's quite a senior hiring manager is making the call his or herself. So you can ask all kinds of different things. And it sounds obvious, but you really want to confirm the address and get the cell phone number. Sometimes people don't want to bother with those little things, but if you have a problem and you need to catch them and you're meeting them at 7:30 in the morning before you start work, they're going to like you a lot more if you're able to call them and postpone an emergency. So a lot of the success obviously has to do with the research. You want to be warming up your references at this time, preparing for tough questions, practice interviewing with or without film, being filmed. Sounds obvious again, but try on all your clothes and accessories. You may have had the perfect summer interview outfit or two, and then you realize that you don't have a nice winter coat and suddenly it will be freezing. So it's worth thinking about all of that. Or you realize you don't have the right bag. And all these details are very important to make sure you're really ready. The first set of research is actually, I think, the most neglected. It's researching the interviewer, him or herself. So you want to study every single thing there is available online. Don't just read the first page of the results either. Study everybody's, sometimes you have a slate of interviews. That's what I mean when I say all. Try and guess what their objections might be. If you're interviewing with a peer, you might want to be sort of reassuring that you're, very uncompetitive, very respectful, act like you have a lot to learn from them, etc. And a lot of times people will skip this when it's an HR person. And for instance, I had a guy who I still tease about this to this day. I said, oh, who will you be interviewing with? Have you researched him or her? And he said, oh, it's just a phone screen with the HR girl. And I started laughing, and I was like, there is nothing about that sentence that is okay. It's not just a phone screen. It's the only thing between you and that job, and it's the most important thing in your life if you want to work at that company. And the HR girl, there's nothing right about that either. That quote-unquote HR girl is going to hold whether you get the next meeting in her hands. So I suggest you take her very, very seriously. And so we went online and we looked her up and we researched her, and it was true. She was very young. She hadn't worked there very long. She had 600 friends on Facebook, and she may have had some of the characteristics that he was thinking. But the fact is he found out where she went to school. He found out what kind of person she was. He was extremely respectful and interested in her, asked her how long she worked there, asked her lots of questions about the company, and he got his next round. But he wasn't cavalier about it once he realized the importance of it, and also realized how disrespectful the whole idea was. And the company has chosen to put the screening in this person's hands and take it seriously. And because most people don't, it can really be a bonus. The company research everyone seems to know about, at least my MBA alumni clients, certainly. But a lot of times they'll study, they'll study odd things, like they'll study the numbers of the company or their financial reports, but they don't completely understand the business model. And I'm always amazed when I ask sort of basic questions about following the money, the customers, the competitors, etc. And make sure that you can understand every little part of this, because in trying to answer these questions, you might realize what you don't know, or that you're just a little bit confused about something and you weren't even conscious that you were. And it can help you, if you're interviewing with line management, hopefully you're going to be talking about the job in some detail. And so you're going to want to make sure you really get this company and they do exactly what you think they do, and that you're interviewing exactly the part of the company that you think that you are. So, for instance, you know, everybody thinks of S&P and Moody's as being ratings agencies, and they are. But they each have other businesses as well, and if you weren't paying attention, you could find yourself interviewing for one of those other businesses and not quite having realized it because you rushed off the phone when they called you about the job. Obviously, the position, one of the most important things is to ask a lot of organizational questions, ideally ahead of time, but it can help tremendously to understand exactly where a job fits in the hierarchy. It can help you understand what's part of it and what's not, and better guess what their priorities are. And some of this you can find out a little bit ahead of time. And if you're interviewing for jobs that you haven't done that exact job before, another really underutilized tool, I think, is having informational interviews. And I don't care if you're 55, if you're interviewing for a job that you haven't done that exact job before, you've done something similar, the folks that did that job, they were just right down the hall, those are the kind of things I hear. But if you haven't done that exact job, there's probably things you don't know about it, and you don't know you don't know. And it can be a great tool to have an informational interview. It's fine to do it on the phone with somebody doing that exact role before your interview. So you can find out the answers to these kind of questions. You may also ask these kind of questions again on your interview, but you'll at least know the answer of how it works at another company. The reason that you want to ask these questions ahead of time, but these are also often good questions to ask during the interview as well. Because what's going to help you do well in the interview and surpass some of the other candidates, if you're really getting down with the boss-to-be, talking about the details of the job as if you're about to get your hands dirty and start it tomorrow, it will help him or her really picture you doing it. You know, if I hire this woman, she's going to take off running. Or she's already half doing it in this interview. She's half doing her job in the interview, asking the kind of questions she would ask if she was starting tomorrow. And these are the kind of questions that really help you get the day-to-day of a job. Are there any questions so far, Malche?
Actually, I do have one question, which is when you're interviewing, during the interview, how much should you focus on what's on your resume versus, in a way, what the job is about and other things like that?
If you're interviewing with, again, the HR or an external recruiter, there's not much to talk about except your past accomplishments and what's on your resume. But ideally, if you're interviewing with a hiring manager or a peer or someone in the department, in general, the more you can steer the conversation to the job and their challenges and maybe relating your accomplishments to that job, the better. And also, if you know, I don't know about you guys, but I don't have the perfect resume, and not all my clients have the perfect resume. You know, people have gaps, they have weird things, they have uncomfortable stuff they don't want to talk about. They've got that time back in 2004 when blah, 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 right? The last thing most people want is to spend a lot of time dissecting their resume and why they did this and why they went from here to there. And the best way to avoid that is to be talking about the job there. And oftentimes you can impress your future boss by asking smart questions about what he or she needs done that only someone who had a clue could ask than you can by selling the time that you accomplished this, that, or the other thing. Obviously, you do want to tell some stories of your successes, and especially if you can really clearly relate them to their job, you know, and say things like, it sounds like you really need somebody to look at your overall operational expenses and find ways to cut down, especially if you need to reduce expenses 20% in the first 6 months. Well, when I was at so-and-so, the way I cut our expenses, I knocked this much out of the budget was by doing X, Y, and Z. So if you are going to tell a story, make it really clear that why it's relevant. But better to ask questions about their expenses so that it sounds like you really get it. And, you know, even if you're not always right with sort of suggesting something, you might say, oh, have you guys tried looking into offshoring this, that, or the other thing? They might say they have, they haven't. But as long as your question's intelligent, even if it's not an idea they can run with today, they're going to think that you're a hands-on kind of person and that you're going to be able to start adding value quickly. And even if you're interviewing for a very senior level job, Still, there's some way to be getting your hands dirty in the interview asking questions. It will just be at a slightly bigger, higher level, but it would still be getting a little bit specific about something or other to show that you're not just talking theoretically.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also want to know as much of this as you can ahead of time, but you also want to know the answers to these when you leave the meeting, ideally, so that you really get, you really understand where it fits, so that you're going to be able to give good examples and make your boss-to-be feel really confident that you're going to make him or her look good if they hire you, and that you want to ultimately make them feel like they want to bring you back for another meeting. So basically, before you go in, it can be helpful to summarize in writing what you've learned about all of this, figure out what you don't know, bring those questions that you couldn't find out ahead of time to the interview. They'll be impressed at what you did find out, and and decide what you're going to ask ahead of time. So I want to take a minute to just talk on a big picture level about who gets hired. I think everyone knows that certainly who gets hired isn't always the most qualified person on paper. And I'm sure we've all worked with people where we can't imagine why they ever got hired at all. But in general, the person who gets hired isn't necessarily the one whose accomplishments line up most perfectly with the job. That may be who gets interviewed through a very formal job posting process, but when it comes to the hidden job market, not necessarily at all. It's going to be the candidate that is more likable, fits in better with the corporate culture, and also wows the interviewer with a particular success that's relevant to what he or she needs. So that is the real role as I see it. And also, this focusing very acutely on what they want is huge. Even to the extent that you may or may not have it, they may not even know. So if you're really delving in to understand what they're looking for and what they need, it's just asking those questions will make them feel like you get it, even if you don't necessarily then follow up by saying, and I have all those qualities. Just the really diving into their needs, that alone is going to build a rapport. So you've all read these percentages, and these are the ones that make the most sense to me. When I say packaging, I mean packaging of you, packaging of your accomplishments, and your whole general presentation, from your resume to your clothes to your voice. Unfortunately or fortunately, this is a huge part of who gets hired, but much of this you have more control over than you realize. And this responsiveness, you have 100% control over. And don't underestimate the power, because it can really make the difference for you. And your work experience. So they're not going to be, chances are, talking to you if they don't think you're somewhat qualified, hence that seeming low. I mean, at the selection level, yes, but I mean, once you've gotten the interview, the selection factors change very quickly to things that have to do with overall impression. And in terms of adjusting to match the interviewer's style and interest, that is huge. Everything from body language to energy level to volume, and showing a lot of enthusiasm and friendliness is going to help you a lot, even if they're not being overly enthusiastic and friendly. As long as you're being appropriately so, it's going to help you. I think it makes sense to just think about the ultimate goal of the interview. It's not, unless it's, an interview way down the road. The first interview, you're just trying to get another meeting. So you're not trying to close the deal. You're not trying to make sure you list out every point you ever wanted to make or list every accomplishment. You're just trying to get another meeting. So being liked and likable and showing a certain winning qualities is going to be a lot of it. And if it's an informational interview, it may not even be at that company. It may be a referral to another role or a friend in another company. So in that first meeting, you want to be focusing very much on learning about them and what they need, trying to really understand it to the level that you know what solution will work for them, and to help them find that solution. And again, even if it isn't you. My last job, I went in there with the idea that I was going to help them with the recruiting as a favor, and I wound up getting hired. So I know this technique can work. And this one's always can be a little controversial. But when it comes to interviewing, the less you talk, in general, if it's not with a recruiter or an HR person, the better. The more people love people that listen to them. And I've said this before in other IExec webinars, but one of the theories why in another generation, men often married their secretaries, not so much anymore. But one of the reasons that researchers would say why that was that their wives didn't listen to them, but their secretaries would, because they were being paid to. You know, they were taking dictation. They were really listening. And there's something about us human beings that we really like people that listen to us more than we like people who talk to us. And the more they're talking and you're nodding, the more they're really feeling a rapport, like you get them. You get what their department needs. And of course, I always feel like an idiot making this point on a webinar where I'm talking 100% of the time. But technically, I guess I should be falling in love with each and every one of you. There you go.
So actually, if I may interrupt, Sarah, because we had
Yes.
some questions that might be good. So actually, how do you deal with, for example, the age issue? For example, 50 plus, or when it comes up, how do you deal with that one?
Well, it probably won't come up overtly in an interview, but I think I'll give you, it's sort of off topic, but I'll give you my blurb on age discrimination, that while it may exist, I think age discrimination is a code for some other things. And as long as those other things don't exist, you're unlikely to be hit as hard with it as you would. Age discrimination, if people ask, why don't you want to hire an old woman, an old guy, you know, why do you want a young candidate? The answers typically are they have more energy, they're more willing to travel, they're better with technology, they learn quicker, they'll work like dogs, I can work them to death and they'll come back for more, etc. And so if you've ever said, I'm not good with technology, I'm too old to travel that much, I'm not going to put up with that, you know, I'm not staying till midnight at my, you know, I'm done with those days, right? So I'm not saying that working like a dog and traveling 24/7 is your lot, but displaying an attitude of being up for anything is going to help a lot. And one of the best symbolic ways to show that on an interview, but also to prove it to yourself and change yourself from the inside out, the way to make yourself young on the inside for a corporate or a senior nonprofit role is to become cutting edge with whatever technology affects your industry. Forcing yourself to stay up on every relevant technology to your job, knowing more than your boss about it, being the first one to jump into, and again, only relevant technology. You don't need to be tweeting if tweeting's got nothing to do with what your industry is. But be the one who knows how to use everything that anybody might use, knowing that, you know, being an expert at the CRM software, being an expert with the mobile applications in your industry, being able to talk about that in a facile way. That will, in learning it, you'll get a different attitude, and in being able to talk about it confidently, acting enthusiastic if they mention an IT project that the group has had on hold, will negate any sense, will really help fight against that. It's kind of, it's like shorthand for youth these days. And there's also, of course, visual and symbolic things, you know. The older you are, if you're a woman, the higher heels and more fashionable shoes you should be wearing, in my opinion. You know, make sure that everything to do with your appearance is young. But making more references to long hours, to travel, and to negate any of those typical prejudices right off the bat, I think will help a lot. If you are definitely an older worker, like over 65, I think it's and you look at, I think it's worth thinking about focusing on industries that are a little more open to people. If you are, you know, on the older side. Some people, when they say they're older, they're like 40, and I don't know what they're talking about. But maybe if you're 68, you might want to think about what industries are a little friendlier as well. And you know, we could talk about that offline.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, so you want to be talking as little as possible at the beginning, because ideally you want to get the interviewer talking so that he or she could maybe make some casual reference to the person who used to be in the job, who wasn't very, was great technically but wasn't good with customers, or was really great at sales but let the paperwork slide, or whatever. And then you'll know what there is very important to them, and you can tailor what you say accordingly, so you can really focus on what they need. With a recruiter, it's going to be a lot harder to get them doing most of the talking, but you can still try and, you know, make small talk with them, get them talk a little bit about their background, how they got to know this company, have they done other jobs with the company, what they know about the hiring manager. And it's also important to never talk long, never do a whole stream of talking like I'm doing without a pause, giving them a chance to redirect you. So even if you have a long story, pause so that they can say, oh, tell me more. Or maybe they'll just change the subject, and you won't ever bore them. Because if someone's going on and they're tuning out, it doesn't, if they're tuning out, it doesn't matter how great what you're saying is. You've lost them. So you want to always be sure they're engaged with you. That's why webinars are so hard, because I don't know if you guys are engaged. I don't know who's falling asleep. But if this were a phone interview and you could answer me, I would make sure to like pause a lot so that you could say something and redirect me, ask a different question, etc. You know what I mean, Mache?
Yes, definitely. Sorry, I muted myself, but
Okay.
definitely.
Okay. So these questions maybe are a little awkward, but I think it will help. You'd want to do this in your own words to try and get them talking. So, you know, try and get them talking about the day-to-day job, you know, try and understand the whole department, how it fills in. You want to definitely know that when you leave. It'll help you write a better follow-up letter, figure out who else you want to suggest you meet with. This is a great question. That might keep them talking forever, talking about this. And then, of course, you might interject briefly with some similar accomplishments that you've done at other jobs. So you want to really understand your boss's role. In addition to this person, what other jobs report to them? What is he or she measured at? And some people will be very happy to talk at length about this. Other people might bring it right, you know, that they don't seem interested in these questions, obviously let it go. You really want to, again, these are things we mentioned asking before, but also ask after. This second one, it may seem a little awkward. You want to put it in your own words, but people sometimes love this question, and they'll really get talking, you know, and they really feel like you're interested in them. Okay. This next point, I have big discussions with my clients about this. And on Tuesday mornings, we have job search groups here that are quite senior level. We had one today. And constantly, I love the groups because when I'm talking to someone about appearing more positive, they always say they do, or they are, and that on an interview, they're different. People are always telling me, I'm not like this on an interview, I'm different. But what's great about the group is people can get feedback from each other, and they can see just how important it is to have a much more positive attitude than people even realize they need. This sounds a little nuts, but I really strongly advise you to never say anything negative about anything, even the weather. So those of you that say are financial analysts, you might think, well, what if I'm bearish on the market? I'm supposed to say I'm bullish? And I would say no, but even the way I phrased it, where do you think REITs are going, or some kind of investment, and let's say you think they're going down or whatever it is, then I would say, I would still phrase it in a positive way. Oh, I think, bond prices or whatever, I think they're going to, interest rates, whatever it is that's going in the wrong direction, I think you would say, yeah, I expect that the contraction and blah, blah, blah will continue for about another 9 to 12 months, and the best way that I think we should take advantage of that to make some money on that is to do this, this, and this. So you're still phrasing it in a positive way. The reason is you don't want to talk about anything negative is it's just a psychological factor that it can stick with you. So, isn't this rain terrible? So you might say, you don't want to be an idiot and be like, no, I love the rain. But you might say, yeah, today's quite a day, but I heard it's supposed to clear up by the weekend, which is great. Something like that. This is one of the most underutilized tools. One of the things is we're very used to now seeing people on TV, newscasters, weather people, actors and actresses, comedians, people on reality shows, you name it. And one of the reasons that we have to stay very positive is in the media, we see a lot of newscasters and so forth, that their natural look on their face is very positive. It's almost like they're smiling when they're not smiling. Regular people like you and me, we might look quite dour when we're not smiling. We might have some people just naturally have a very serious looking face in repose, almost like they're frowning. And if you just meet someone casually, that may be fine. But in an interview, people are putting you under the microscope as if you are a newscaster, and they're comparing you to Katie Couric and not to a regular woman, say. And so you need to have, if you don't naturally have an upbeat-looking face, to really work to smile a lot so that you look like a performer, because that's almost, they're suddenly putting you in that box. And you want to really, smiling a lot of times guys think it makes them look, whatever, you fill in the blank. But actually what it often does is just make people look more enthusiastic. Smile, lean forward, up your energy a little bit. It's kind of what's expected on an interview. This is a great technique, number 3 here, for anyone who's naturally a serious or pessimistic person. There's certain whole job categories where that's the normal way to be and not a bad way to be if that's your job. So a lot of my clients who are financial analysts, clients in technology, they don't tend to be bubbly, flowers and roses people babbling on about everything that's so great. But if I tell them to do that in the interview, it's not so easy to pull off and to remember to do. And one great way to make it happen is to make a habit of answering just about every question with a broad-based positive statement conveying positive emotion about the subject of your answer. So what does that mean? So if you say, tell me about yourself, I might say, I've always been very fortunate in my career. And then you launch into your story. Now you may feel like your career has like been a total you-know-what show and you've had nothing but bad luck. But if you say first, I've always been very fortunate in my career, then you're going to be forced to tell the story in the most positive light that you can and to talk about the positive aspect of everything. Or let's say they say, how did you like your time at S&P? Oh, I had a great 4 years at S&P. And then let's say you actually kind of hated your last boss. You're going to look for the positive. It's just going to make whatever comes next be more positive and also make you look like a positive person. If because like you never should badmouth your old employer, but people will kind of associate you with the emotions you talk about to some degree. So, now there's a lot of reasons why to avoid these topics. Most of them, the reason you avoid them is they're about you, not about them, for starters. And also, why it's exactly like what you've done in the past it's actually a great thing to say, this sounds like this sounds somewhat like my last job where I did this, this, and this. That will invite the interviewer to say, yeah, but in this role, you'll also do this. And people love correcting you as long as you didn't make too strong a statement. And you can nod and go, okay, great. Obviously, you never want to criticize your old company or your old boss. The importance of that, even the slightest thing, can really rub off wrongly. And the reason is that if we're just sitting around at lunch or at the bar and you're saying something about your old boss or your old company, I'm going to identify with you. I'm going to be on your side. But when I'm interviewing you for a job, I'm thinking about you working for me. And if I'm going to identify with anybody, it's going to be your old boss or your old colleagues. So if you say anything about them, I'm going to somehow blame you for it. It's hard to explain, but try and trust that that is the case. So the tell me about yourself question is always a tough one. Ideally, you postpone it so you know it's really important to them, and then you can answer in a way that's going to focus on their priorities. If not, just keep it brief and just say a few things and get right to. That's why I'm so interested in this job here, because you guys have such a strong international business focus, and I have such a strong business development experience in Indonesia and Japan where you want to expand. So you're bringing it very much back to that. Hopefully you know what's most important to them, and you make sure that you hit on the key needs that they've mentioned. And again, I gave this answer about starting with a broad-based, positive, global thing. And the more you think it's not true, almost the better it is to practice saying it. So people have had a very, many of you I know have had very painful and difficult career experiences in your life, and it's been a tough economy the last couple of years, so the likelihood of you having had one relatively recently is higher than usual. People have had, a lot of injustice happens in the workplace, and it can be emotionally tough to deal with and really tough to talk about positively. So the more painful something is to talk about, the more important it is to practice. And when you practice, I suggest that you talk about it in the extreme. You may not say that on the interview, but let's say you had a really horrible relationship with your old boss. You might practice saying, it was such a great experience working for James because, and then come up with something somewhat true that you could say thereafter. Now maybe you'll leave off that part about how it was the greatest thing that ever happened to you, but you'll still have those examples that are true, and it can help you think of a way to spin things positively. Any questions or comments, Mache?
Yes, of course. So we actually have quite a few, but for example, one would be, can you speak about approaches in the behavioral interview?
Okay. Now, in general, those are a lot less common with line managers than with HR managers, but at some big companies, they do still do those. I know Google does them. Some of the consulting firms do. I think the key to them are to practice some ahead of time from an interviewing book. You could probably Google it. And then to have some examples that you're going to use. There's some typical questions that are going to come up, and practice your answers with someone to make sure they sound as good as you think they do. And then the thing about behavioral-based questions is that it's hard to think on the spot of an example. And so you want to practice, have like 5 or 6 ready to go of standard behavioral-based questions that you saw in a book. And then hopefully you can modify those at the time, because it is very hard to think on your feet. When they ask, tell me about a time when, and they come up with such a detailed scenario that may never have happened to you. Ideally, you'll be able to think of something. If you can't, you might say, I can't quite think of an example where it was and mention one of the factors that wasn't the case, but I think it might be appropriate for me to tell you about a time when, and just give them a slightly different scenario. Is your best option. Or you might say, having a bit of you could just be honest, I'm having a brain dead moment. I'm not able to think of when that exact happened, but can we come back to that one? Or something like that. If you're, so I know people have succeeded just making something up if it was too specific, but I'm not going to recommend that. And even if you felt okay with that ethically, it's a little hard to pull off at the last minute. So I think it's good to practice if you ahead of time, and just make sure that they're exhibiting the qualities that they want you to. So you want to be talking about listening and compromise and getting stuff done within a deadline and adjusting your timeline. Like there's a number, get a book. If it's consulting, get a book, because it's its own, it's too big a topic really to cover here.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, perfect. Yeah, so maybe if you have some time, we have another one too. Can you say, how would you deal with line managers that have less experience than you do? How to navigate without making them feel threatened?
I think the more you're talking about asking them questions and getting them talking about what they need, it won't necessarily come up that you have so much more experience than them. And the more you're, sort of hanging on their every word, the more you're really interested, asking them their opinion about things, asking them, and this is a very important question. Your goal is never to stump the interviewer with your question. So you don't want to ask questions you don't think they're going to know the answer to, especially a line person, because you definitely don't want to be making them feel dumb. Now with HR, you also don't want to. Occasionally you may ask a question that they won't know the answer to, and you might say, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but, and so if you're ever sure they won't, give them an out as you're asking it, I think. But if you're interviewing with someone a little bit more junior, the more you're asking their opinion and what they think of this or that, I think the less they're going to find you threatening.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So take me through your resume. The big thing here is with hiring managers, they don't want to hear every little thing. You only want to talk about the highlights that are relevant and get back to the focus on the jobs that are relevant to the job you'll be doing. Get through it fast and get back to why you're so interested in this job and why you think you're a good fit. Quickly, quickly, quickly. They can always go back and ask for more detail and leave it open for them to do so. With recruiters, it's a little different. Sometimes they're going to make you go through the blow by blow. But skip over whatever you can, and if they insist on more details, then just go through it. But know they're looking for red flags, and the key is to practice talking about why you left things and all your transitions. And if you're going to be interviewing with recruiters, that's huge. There are certain questions that you just need to practice ahead of time with other people. And you want to get back to talking about the job again. So some of the questions you want to have really good answers for we're going to cover here. How long have you been looking? The ideal answer is not very long. If you've been out of work a long time and you want to separate, when you just say you were doing something else, traveling, helping someone start their business. Sorry, Rebecca and I, this was a Columbia Business School thing. But you definitely don't want to make it sound like you've been looking a long time, so it'll look like something's wrong with you. So if you've been out a year, you might say, when I left XYZ company, I took a bit of a sabbatical and I traveled for about 9 months. I've just started job hunting relatively recently, and it's going great. I'm meeting with a lot of companies. The economy really seems to be picking up in our industry. That's the positive flow, because you don't want to make it sound like you've been trying and failing, because they'll think there's something wrong with you, even if it may not be the case at all. Again, people think, if you say you're lucky, people are going to think you're smart. If you say you're unlucky, human nature is going to be wanting to have some way to blame you. It's not fair, but it's true. So you always want to make it sound like everything's going great and you're relatively lucky. This is another one you want to have a really good practice for this question. Why did you leave X company? You always begin by complimenting the company, the boss, and the team. Find something that you can say with a big smile on your face. And if it's tough to do, then practice. There's nothing like this to make you sound like a winner if you agree with their business decision to eliminate your position. So you might say, because of the consolidation of blah, 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 it made a lot of sense for them to simplify the product line and get rid of blah, 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 so they closed our desk. It actually was a great strategy, and the company stock's actually gone up 20% since then. So you're actually agreeing with the business reason because, again, they're going to be identifying with the company, and it will make you sound very mature that you understand why they had to get rid of some positions, and it will make you sound like you're on management side, and if they hire you, you'll be on their side. It just sounds so mature when you do it, and you practice it so you hit just the right note. If this is at all true, it's very reassuring to people. Companies are always looking to see if there's something wrong with you. They can't help it. That's their job, to screen out the problems. And so if you're in good contact with your old colleagues and they like you and you see each other socially, it's going to seem like they did regret having to get rid of you. They love you, and then you're still in contact. Again, talking about that you're fortunate has this weird halo effect of making you look like you're very competent. And there are times for the success stories. So when they relate to the specific things that you already know they need, or when they demonstrate universally loved traits. So you want to have some of these on hand. If you have an example that shows how much you love the job, that's always great, especially if it's something that not everybody likes. So if you love analyzing spreadsheets and you analyze spreadsheets for fun at home and you can talk about that in a believable, specific way, talk about it. Because if you tell me how much you love something, especially something I don't love, I'm going to think you're going to be good at it. We all profess to not like to think workaholism is a bad thing. But when it comes to hiring, most everybody wants a workaholic working for them. So any stories about you staying up all night to get the job done, or, you know, within reason, anything that shows a tremendous work ethic as an aside, as part of a story, is always a great thing. Talking about black belt people skills is huge. So, you know, you could casually tell a story about, oh yeah, they always would send me to Omaha because I was the, you know, the client. He hated salespeople in general, but for some reason he loved me. So I swear I made that trip to Omaha every month, and our revenue through that company tripled during this period. Something that shows that you get along with people in an, you know, unusually good way. And again, everybody loves people that are good with technology. In technology firms, of course, but not in technology. So if you talk about some software implementation that you led for your old group, people love that. And if they don't like technology, they love that you'll be the one who will be able to make that tech project they've been postponing happen. Again, this is where you want the interview to go, where you're already talking about how to solve some of their problems, how to develop new business, whatever the topic of the job is. You're getting into the job in the interview. Here's just some of the things you can talk about to get them thinking about the next steps. It's always great if you can get them to drop a name who the candidate will meet with, so you can suggest that in your follow-up letter. If for some reason you don't get called back, you might be able to find some other way to get into that person. Make sure you get, you know, you've got everybody's contact info. Get everybody's business card if they have one. If you didn't have all their emails and their signatures, because you want to follow up with everybody that you met with individually by email within the first 24 to 48 hours. So we just talked about that. One of the things, even though they don't all get read, to some people the follow-up letters are very important. It's very important that they not be rude, that they're not just thank yous, they're follow-up letters talking about whatever was important to the interviewer, coming up with a new idea, making, you know, repeating back to them the most important qualities or the things that are going to need done, taking an interest in them. Everyone should be different. It should be something you can't write to everybody. And if it takes a long time, you're probably on the right track. I can't tell you how many follow-up letters people send me to review for content that I find typos in. It's hugely important that you have other people look at them. And it's hugely important that you have email software that scans every single email for typos before it sends them. And Outlook, you can set up Outlook to scan everything, that everything gets spell checked on the way out. If you have Gmail, I don't think Gmail has automatic spell check, so you've got to use it in an email. I think unless you have perfect spelling, you need to use an email client that does. That is the cause of a lot. I mean, of course, spell check can create its own problems, but I'm amazed at how many typos should have been caught by spell check because people aren't having it automatic. So just want to throw that in there. Okay. Are there any questions, Maciej?
Actually, we do. So talking about the interviewing and awkward questions, how should you address a departure where you resigned because you disagreed with the decisions the CEO was making?
That is, some of these very specific things, I feel like I would need to know like the nitty-gritty to be able to say how, what was the decision, and how does it, I'd have to know who you're interviewing with because you might answer it differently for each company. So if, let's say, the CEO was focused on moving strongly into the consumer market and you felt like that was an unwise way to go, and the company that you're talking to has been moving away from the consumer market into the wholesale market, you could say very casually, I just felt like I want, then it would make sense to possibly slightly reference that. But I think I'd really have to answer that on a case-by-case basis. But I think it's very important to figure out a reason that doesn't impact your new company at all. There's a lot of people that are very suspicious of people that voluntarily leave a job without another job. So I would always want to talk that through very carefully, I guess. So it's too hard to answer, I guess, without knowing every little detail.
Mm-hmm. Sure, of course, of course. Actually, can you tell us also, if possible, I'm just trying to find the questions right now. So one of the person's friends suggested that she smiled during the phone interview because the interviewer can tell. Is this really true?
Well, I don't know if they can tell if you're smiling, but I think it does change your voice. I think that smiling will help you have a slightly different tone in your voice. And I think it's a great advice, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Here, I'll try it now. I'll smile as I answer the next few questions.
Perfect, perfect. So if you have time, we actually have a few more questions too, or we can wait till the end of the presentation.
Well, maybe I'll just go over the recruiter stuff real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I know that IExec and a lot of what you do focuses more on this because a lot of the IExec jobs are first screened or maybe screened by recruiters a little bit more than a lot of the way my clients go about job hunting. But I will talk about them a little bit and what's different.
Great, perfect. So also we'll go a little bit over time, but that's fine. So we'll try to get through as many questions at the end as well as possible.
I just want to screen through these quickly. Mm-hmm. So again, sometimes people think recruiter interviews don't count or that phone screens don't count. And just to say that they do, and it's extremely important that you prepare the same way you would otherwise. Always take recruiter calls, even if you're not looking. Always be helpful. They take very detailed notes, and any rudeness or casualness with them will get noted. And if they're at a big firm, it could kind of blackball you for a while at that firm. Try and help with other searches they might have. Always a great thing to ask at the end. Of course, remember that they do not work for you. Even if it seems like they're relaxed, they're screening and evaluating you the entire time. And again, try and get them talking early on. It may not work, but it's worth a shot. And then it's a whole different topic, but salary negotiation starts with the first conversation, and there's a lot of separate techniques, but to not get trapped into a discussion of salary early on. Telephone interviews, again, the main thing is take it very seriously. landline, turn off every background phone. Don't rush it overly. Remember to make small talk like you would any other time. Try and get them talking. And then this is the most important tip that distinguishes phone interviews from anything else, which is to keep your answers even briefer. And if the answer requires a long explanation, to chunk it out. Pause, let them say, uh-huh, keep going, something like that. And again, don't rush off the phone. Finish it up, make the small talk, ask about next steps, thank them. Treat it like you're not on the phone to that extent. And again, good follow-up letters. A lot of the errors around telephone interviews is not thinking that they're as important as any other interview, even though they may be shorter. And I have a lot of other sort of points about, you know, close and so forth, but I think a lot of people know them, and I would rather get to the questions, I think, because this is normally a little bit longer presentation than an hour. So do you have some more questions for me, Auntie?
Yes, actually we do. So, for example, are there any rules in discussing compensation, whether it's talking to a recruiter from the outside or an internal HR or hiring manager?
I think the most important thing is to stall as long as you can. That's another presentation on negotiation, which I'm happy to do. But basically, your goal is to stall. If they want to know numbers and you don't even know what the job is, the key is to always be unfailingly polite, never have a tone in your voice, and don't necessarily answer their question. So if they're asking you about comp and they haven't even talked to you about a job, it's kind of, you know, none of their business, but you can't tell them that. So you want to say, well, when we're a little further along the process, you know, we can talk about this a little more. Can you tell me a little bit about the range, the comp range for the job? Half the time they won't tell you. So if they don't know what the range for the job is, how can them knowing your salary help? Of course, they do know the comp range for the job, but it doesn't make any sense. So again, the more you deal with hiring managers and the less you deal with recruiters and HR, if you get your interviews via networking, the more likely you are to be able to easily postpone this discussion, which in general is the best thing to do for your future comp. But there's a million different stalling techniques, but that is your overall goal. If you happen to be currently employed, it's worth looking at your hire letter and any contracts you signed around, you know, non-compete, protection of information, non-disclosure. Sometimes it'll say something like, there'll be some line that might imply that you're not supposed to talk about your comp and company salaries. That's a godsend if you happen to have one like that. And you can say, oh, I signed a non-disclosure act when I started, and I'm forbidden to talk about my compensation while I'm here. If you want to let me know the range of the job, I can let you know if that'll be a problem. That's beautiful when you can do that. A lot of people don't think to do that. If you don't happen to have a non-disclosure agreement, if you happen to ever talk to HR, your lawyer, and say, lawyers at the company, and say, oh, you know, I have an employee, you want to know if it was okay to disclose their comp at the company. Like, the lawyers love saying no. They'll probably just say no. Oh, no, you're not allowed to do that, whether it's true or not. And then you can say, oh, our legal team, you know, doesn't. It's, you know, that doesn't work for most people, but occasionally it'll work, and it's a great way to get out of it.
Great, perfect. There's plenty of questions as well, but if you like to, you can finish up the presentation, and then we'll get to some of the questions as well.
Okay. Well, let me just kind of, this is going to be very slow because it's this thing. Sorry, let me just go as quick as I can here and just get to I just want to have the last, just in case people want to reach me. I'm not going to be able to answer individual questions, but I am happy to, if people want to, are interested in further coaching and might want to set up an appointment or do a short free consultation, that is a possibility. If you want you're going to be sent a recording of this. If you want a copy of the rest of the presentation that I would have done if I had more time, and you email me, I'm happy to send that along as well. So I think that might be all I have. And I'm happy to answer a few more questions.
Perfect, perfect. Yes, and as you mentioned, we have recorded the webinar, so we'll be sending that along, and we'll also send your email as well. So for everybody who wants to get a copy of the slides, please get in contact with Sarah. She'll be happy to provide them as well. And so for questions, actually, so we do have some. So what's the best way to answer the simple yet multi-purposeful? Tell me about your biggest strengths and biggest weaknesses.
Okay. Well, the biggest strength, I think, is to try and come up with one that relates to the most important aspects of the job, especially if they told you something that's really on their mind at the moment. If it's a sales role, but they mentioned that they really wanted somebody who was good at sales training, if it was a sales management job and they really wanted somebody who was going to develop the sales team, not just someone who was good at sales themselves, then you might want to come up with a strength that had to do with your teaching ability or your mentoring ability, assuming that there's some truth to that. In terms of weaknesses, there's a number of techniques to go with. I think that going with something that is overly trite, generally should be avoided in terms of saying, I'm a workaholic or, something too obvious. I think you would want to talk over with a friend or a coach what your real weaknesses are, and then ideally you'll pick one that is less at the kiss of death for this job, and find a way to talk about how you've managed it or how you keep it from being a problem. So let's say you say, if it's a sales job, you don't want to use a weakness like being shy. But if it's an analyst job, it might be okay, especially if you're on the buy side. So you might say, I've always been a bit shy about public speaking, and but I find if I really prepare and practice a lot ahead of time that I actually do a great job, and blah, 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 and I join Toastmasters or whatever, So to think of something that isn't the kiss of death for your job, and to use that, that's also true, just because I feel like you're always going to sound better if you're telling the truth as well. And so again, it's a little bit of a case-by-case basis for what you should use.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So I might say, a true one I could use if I'm not interviewing for a job, but I might say, and this would be the kiss of death in a lot of jobs, I might say, sometimes I have a tendency to be a little too frank or blunt with people. But in my job, I feel like in some ways it can be an asset, and people often thank me for the thing that could, by very careful. And then I talk about having careful not to hurt people's feelings or to, couch it in compliments or something along those lines. That's an unusual one. 99 out of 100 people should never use that one because it really is an asset in very few jobs, except possibly mine.
Gotcha. Perfect. And maybe we can have time for one last question. There's a few more, so so basically we'll try to get to one. What if a recruiter asks about other prospects that the person is looking into?
If they're an external recruiter, like a headhunter, I definitely don't like that question, and I feel like it's, often they're asking because they want to get that job. So I don't recommend you go into a lot of detail. I would generally say, I am talking to other companies in similar roles. I might say, I haven't been interviewing long, but I've been talking to people at, you might throw companies out but not get specific. Like if you're interviewing at JP Morgan, you might say, I've been talking, I've talked to some people at some other firms. If they ask what, you might say who. And the fact is, you could have been talking to your friend at Goldman Sachs. It doesn't matter what it is. But to a certain extent, at some point, it's none of their business, but you want to be really polite about it. But you can also say, especially if you're a senior, I have been talking to some other firms, but I've actually been asked, they're not things I can talk publicly about. And the fact is I've had, many clients have been asked to sign non-disclosure agreements before they even know about a position. So, but the key is no matter, even if you're not quite answering their question, to be unfailingly pleasant. And be, now's the time to be smiling as you're saying it. If you are interviewing at exactly at a company similar or a better, a company with that maybe has a better reputation, sometimes it's helpful to say that, especially in financial services, they're a little competitive. So if you're interviewing at a B-level investment bank, to mention that you're interviewing at two A-level ones, sometimes that will get them all excited about you. So again, many times these are a judgment call, how to handle them specifically, because some industries are competitive and you can use that to your advantage a little bit. But again, generally I would, be a little bit vague, but definitely make it sound like you do have other interviews.
Perfect, perfect. And with that, I mean, we want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time. So we're going to finish up the webinar right now. But thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much, Sarah, for presenting as well. It's been
you're welcome.
It was a very informative webinar. So definitely please reach out to Sarah. We have her contact information on the bottom here as well. And we will be sending a recording of the webinar too in a few days. So you'll be able to look at the slides and the video again as well. So thank you so much everybody for attending, and have a great night, and see you on the next webinar.
Okay,
All right.
great. Good luck, everyone.
Good night, everybody.